So previously we've been looking at the workplace experience and the all-consuming conversations that all companies and organisations are having at the moment about some of the challenges they're facing, and we've also talked about the process. What I'd like to look at next is actually the practical application for that, how we do it, how we go from the challenging conversations and the theory to actually introducing the change and enhancing that workplace experience. Can you share that with us?
So what we've tried to do is to sort of break it down so it feels digestible. And for our clients, they can kind of see the logic and the connectivity between the stages, but also they can kind of track the progress as we move through this as well. So it's only 6 stages. It keeps it quite simple. The first 4 are really about the diagnostic tool that we have and the insights that can produce. So you'll see here, first of all, and we talked on that slide a couple of times ago, about you have to understand how the building was used prior to change, prior to the strategy, to then inform that strategy and then mitigate those impacts. So in terms of profiling the building users, this is really important. It's about understanding the demographic in that building today. It's about understanding how that building supports them and the kind of roles they do. So are they desk-based? Is their work about, I don't know, idea creation? Do they have to have confidential conversations every day? How much time do they spend in sort of a collaborative manner as well? But also job mobility. You know, I mentioned that 25% in that case study before weren't actually based in that office. You have to understand the profile of how the building is being used. Secondly, Claire, is around how the, what colleagues, what their requirements are from that building. We talked earlier about physical, sensory and emotional factors. And when we talk about physical, we're talking about things like meeting rooms, about desks, about breakout areas. And although they're quite generic, different people doing different roles will have a different set of requirements in terms of what they need from the physicality and the functionality of that building. In terms of sensory, we've mentioned it already. You know, noise, smell, hydration, light, all of those have been proven to be really key in terms of well-being more than anything else. The emotional one's an interesting one because what that then starts to flesh out is some of those things that really influence how someone feels about the workplace. It's less of the practical stuff. And I don't know if you'd be surprised to hear that some of the stuff in there is parking. Some of the stuff is around Wi-Fi, connectivity, around some of the shared areas, maybe sort of like the coffee stations, cleanliness of those toilets and the kind of hygiene areas. And one of the things we find a lot of is a source of frustration will be around sort of etiquette and behaviour of fellow colleagues in the workplace as well. So understanding all of this and drawing it out helps you then to have a look at what that workplace experience would truly look like if you make those changes. And equally, if you don't, you can then identify the things that need additional focus. So that's around the requirements. Essential activities, it's that thing, that old adage about focus on the things that matter most. If you can understand and profile your building users and understand the key activities that different groups do every day, again, if you then were asking someone to work from home, how do you replicate that? How do you make sure they're able to follow those activities or what the transition path would look like from working in an office space to then working from home and still being able to do that? So some of the things that we found that always kind of end up in that top 5 around the activities be around planned meetings, having face-to-face meetings, around hosting visitors and what that brand experience is like as visitors come into the office space as well, individual desk-based work and collaboration, that word collaboration yet again. So if you understand the key activities, then that's what you would look at in terms of re-engineering if maybe they're not supporting your colleagues as well as they would, or you need to replicate them in a home environment. Okay, the fourth one is around the psychological contract fulfillment. And I've mentioned this a few times, and I've mentioned the 4 Ps. Just very quickly, these 4 Ps fundamentally impact how someone feels about the organisation and their role. And it has been proven to be linked to operational effectiveness. And we work with a very experienced gentleman called Jason Langley, who's an organizational psychologist, and he's brought an awful lot to this methodology and a different dynamic. And in essence, you've got payoff, process, people, and purpose. And when we talk about payoff, we talk about, of course, reward and remuneration, about feeling invested, and about personal development. If you talk about process, it's those functional aspects, it's the IT, it's the kit and the stuff you have to do your job. It's how supported you feel. But one of the key things around process is how consistent are those processes and policies actually deployed. So therefore, how do you feel about that? In terms of people, it's that interpersonal stuff, it's that sense of belonging. What the impact of that be if you then had to start working from home? And purpose, is the organization's purpose aligned to my purpose as an individual? And what's interesting about this is that working environment, that physical building, impacts all 4 of these P's. And I passionately feel that if you want to understand the impact of any changes and any strategies, you have to understand how the building is impacting these 4 P's today to understand then what you need to consider in the future. The 5th we've mentioned already, it's about informing decision making. As always with any of this kind of work, looking at the workplace, looking at changes, there's so much to consider, there's so much to do. So where do you start? So actually by doing stages 1 to 4, which is about using the diagnostic tool, it gives you a very clear direction in terms of where would you start, what would the things be that are most important, give you the biggest sort of bang for your buck, or when you're looking at productivity and well-being of your colleagues. And then finally, the improvement actions. What we tend to do is we have a methodology in terms of actually how we go from this stage of understanding and evaluation through to change. We have that program delivery experience, but a lot of the time when you work with organizations, they will have their own sort of program management framework. So it's about integrating with that. But for us, these are the 6 steps. I say 1 to 4 is all about that true understanding of really what's happening today, and how people feel and how buildings are supported to really inform where you go from here.
And Iain, correct me if I'm wrong. So I can follow the logic through of these steps 1 to 6. We have kind of breakdown sort of steps and logic and approach for each one of these levels, do we? We have sub levels of toolkits that we can share with customers to help them walk through these steps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Some of the level of data and insights it provides, some of the toolkit in terms of the actual understanding activities and looking at the employee journey, all of that is, for want of a better term, it's part of the toolkit. And that's why we've always been very keen in Interserve to have that skill set within the team, within the business. So therefore, we're not dependent on bringing sort of outside sort of consultancies and larger organizations to help us. This is all absolutely part of what we do and how we do it. But yes, this is keeping it, it looks very easy when you talk about it in 6 stages. The reality is there's a lot that sits behind all of this, which makes it as effective as it is.
And I might ask a really difficult question now, but I'm sure listeners will be interested. You know, we've been through this process, or you have, with a number of customers of Interserve recently. I realise there's no kind of standard, but what should people expect in terms of, you know, if they're going to go through this process and get the desired outcomes in terms of investment from time and how long, you know, can you say shortest to longest, or, you know, any kind of sort of benchmark of how to sort of realise these results, what sort of time they'd have to invest?
Yeah, so working with a very well-known organisation at the moment, Claire, and we're just sort of looking at how long that initial evaluation stage would take, and that's typically about 6 weeks, because part of that obviously is reaching out to the employees and to get their feedback. And I know a lot of organisations do a lot of surveys, and there's survey fatigue. I know there's you know, people have probably sent surveys out about, have you got the IT equipment you need from home? So this is very different, and I think how you engage the employees is very, very important. So it's definitely sort of a 6-week process up front. And then in terms of where you go from there and the timings, you know, before COVID-19, there would be you know, a few sort of workshops, and again, getting people to be part of the solution, taking the insights, sharing the insights with the colleagues, Always a very interesting process when you play some of this back and then they start to look at it. But what we do now is we do this virtually. So we do it through video calls. It's not ideal, but it's absolutely possible. And it works very well as well. So in terms of then where you move to delivering the improvement actions, is a bit of a how long is a piece of string. It depends what's in there. But different organisations are working at different pace at the minute, and you try and adapt to it.
So, Iain, we've covered an awful lot of ground here, and there's a lot of content and a lot of food for thought. What would be kind of your key takeaways that you'd say to people to, consider what organisations and their workplace strategy and how they can use this approach? What would they be?
Okay, you're right. I think that we have covered an awful lot there, and I think by following this kind of logic, by using the methodology and what have you, I think fundamentally the first thing would be about understanding your benchmark. You don't tend to go on a change program, which fundamentally this is, without understanding your starting point. So I would say creating a benchmark which you can then revisit and reevaluate to make sure that you are delivering on those improvements, productivity, well-being, how people feel about the organization. So the benchmark is really, really important. It's about understanding what your colleagues' requirements are of the workspace and how the workspace supports them to do their job. We all do quite different jobs. We're all very different individuals and have different preferences and styles. So it's understanding what that looks like in an office space, but also in a home space. And if organizations are to make those changes, what are those implications? Because the implication isn't just purely, how do we make sure people feel connected? We've talked about a lot there, which talks about more behavioral stuff and the psychology of this and some of the more subconscious aspects. So we need to do this work because then you understand the implications of the strategy. So that would be number two. Number three would be to identify what needs to be retained and what needs to be replicated. And very simply, if you understand how well your building supported people prior to maybe changing their working environments, what needs to be replicated, and what needs to be retained, whether they are remaining in the office space in a slightly different environment or whether they're now working from home or a hybrid of the two. Fourth would be on focusing on both the physical and emotional. I think sometimes it's always easier to do the physical and functional aspects, but you absolutely need to understand what some of the emotional impacts are, because well-being, as we've all talked about so much in recent months, is so important. So when you look at the workspace, it's understanding the impact on both physical and emotional aspects. And this kind of work as well, it enables the change and the transformation to be insight-led. I think that's really important. This is one of those crossovers with customer experience. It's always insight-led. So that way it enables you to focus on what matters the most. It has to be by design. You can't leave the employee experience and the employee journey to chance. So ensure that the colleague experience is by design and not just an output of process and policy change.
It's really, for me, the biggest one there is that emotional requirements. And I think many of our customers have sort of shared the same kind of experiences around how they want their people to feel, and some of that isn't being looked after as well as it might be when they're at home. So for me, that's probably one of the real standout ones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that
obviously this is something that we do for our customers. So any of our customers we can engage with around supporting them with this program. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a finite resource, but what we now have is because we have the methodology, it's kind of out of the box. It still is. We shape it around the organisation, their particular challenges. But yes, this is something we do for our customers across private and public sector. Very much a USP for us. There's obviously a lot of organizations that focus on technology and connectivity being sort of part of the lead in terms of workplace. That is very, very important, and what we focus on is more of that kind of human aspect, behavioral aspect, and in terms of well-being. So really making sure the workplace is by design, and then how technology augments that and supports that.
One of the massive areas as well, of course, around this and the emotional requirements is staff mental well-being. And I know that's a whole different conversation, but it's one of the things that's playing in the back of my mind as we're talking about this, is just how important to really place these considerations on your people, you know, beyond just the building. So no, really interesting, Iain. Thank you. By way of kind of next steps, you happy for us to share your contact details for people to reach out direct to you? Certainly, I'm happy for mine to be shared.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got our details on here. So if anyone wants to get in touch, even if they just want to share experiences, talk about some of the information in here, some of the things that we've covered. Equally, our customers know where to find us anyway. But yeah, very much about sort of sharing some of the thinking and the methodology, but would absolutely welcome to be contacted either directly to myself, or obviously your details are on here too, Claire.
Thank you, Iain. It's certainly given me a lot of food for thought, and I like the approach of understanding the steps that companies would need to go through, and it's certainly something I'll be talking about more with some of my customers in the near future. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Claire.